It has finally happened. Alexander Nikishin has been allowed to terminate his contract with Scott Petersburg, and now we are merely hours, maybe a couple days away, who knows, from the Carolina Hurricanes from getting their blue chip prospect.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers. Also do some baseball coverage at Covering the Corner at SB Nation. I'm also the co-host of the Surge Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. And man, we got a fabulous Friday jam-packed episode as we get to talk about Alexander Nikishin being allowed to sign with the Carolina Hurricanes after his contract has been officially terminated between him and Scott Petersburg of the KHL. We do get to talk about the Carolina Hurricanes securing first-round home ice advantage with their point last night against the Washington Capitals. And we do get to hear from Rod Brind'Amour post-game. But before we jump into a crazy Friday episode, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And what a way to kick off an early Friday morning. It was announced very early Friday morning here in the States, of course, a little after 10 a.m. over in Russia. And this is from rg.org over there. And it's basically how Alexander Nikishin has been allowed to terminate his contract with his KHL Scott Petersburg. Of course, his rights still pertain to them if he ever decides to go back, but he is allowed to sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. It's not been official yet of him signing with Carolina, but all signs point to it happening very, very soon. Of course, we saw Eric Tulsky on Thursday tweet, post, whatever you want to call it, a plane emoji, which basically assumed to everyone that he is heading over to take care of this and talk to Alexander Nikishin and his agencies and all of that. And now we get the news on early Friday morning that this is the case. So part of the RG article here is that Alexander Nikishin is hopeful he can resolve his visa situation in time to play for the Carolina Hurricanes before the end of the regular season of the NHL. And he even goes on, and Nikishin says, "If it were possible, I'd be ready to play tomorrow," he told RG Friday morning. "If it works out, I'd be thrilled and would give it everything I've got." So officially, his contract's been terminated. And the fact that, according to what RG's sources are saying, Rod Brind'Amour would like to get Nikishin into at least one regular season game in order to use him in the playoffs. They have 4 games left in the regular season, and of course, the last one coming up on the 17th against the Ottawa Senators. So, and that's very, very exciting for the fact that you're possibly looking at Alexander Nikishin, hopefully, depending on visa situations, could be ready to go for at least one game to get him ready for the playoffs. And of course, we all know Carolina's, because he's a left side defenseman. We all know that it's Slavin, Orlov, and Gostisbehere. So it'll be very interesting to see where he might fit in. Of course, he also can play on the right side too. So there is some versatility of having Nikishin on either side of the blue line, but this will be just fantastic to get him in there. And he goes on to say, "I know the competition is serious, but I'm ready. I'm coming to the NHL with the mindset that I have to start from scratch, and I think I'm well prepared for that. Scott got me ready. I'm thankful to the club, the staff, and head coach Roman Rottenberg for everything they've done for me. And the fact that he hasn't spoken to Rod Brind'Amour yet, but he'll do whatever it is asked once he arrives. He has been in touch with fellow Russian and Hurricanes forward Andrei Svechnikov, who he's counting on to help adapt into life in the U.S. So the fact that he also says he does have some English, it's basic, but he might ask Andrei for a little bit of help for the more nuanced when it comes to more nuanced English, but he does know a little bit of it. But this is so great. This is the news we've all been waiting for the last, everyone's been waiting for the last couple of years of, ready for him to come over once the Ska contract is over. Once they got eliminated from the Gagarin Cup playoffs, then it's like, okay, when is he going to be able to come over before his contract's up at the end of May? This is probably what we're looking at. And this is the last thing he did say. It still doesn't feel real that I'm actually going into the NHL. I think when I arrive, it'll feel like a dream, and I'm really looking forward to this next chapter of my life. Like I said, it's so exciting for the fact that now we're going to see Nikishin finally be able to come over here. We're going to see, we've all been waiting for it. Everyone's been hyped about him coming over, and now you're looking at a possibility of that. The hope is he'll be able to play here in the regular season, at least for one game, so we can use him in the playoffs, which would be fantastic. Because I know on Wednesday, Ivan Demidov was announced he was going to the Montreal Canadiens, which is huge for a teammate like him. And then the fact that Ska's letting all their guys leave early, and now Nikishin is looking to be that guy too. So it's just... It's a waiting game. It's figuring out visas. It's figuring out because with the contract stuff. So the fact of where his age is at, he will be signing a 2-year ELC instead of a 3-year ELC just because of how with ages and how that usually breaks out. But for Carolina, I don't think it really matters. You're talking about one of the best defensemen ever in KHL history. He's 23. Signing a 2-year ELC is not that big of a deal because once that's getting closer to being extended, the Hurricanes are going to give it to him. He's been their number one prospect for the last 2 or 3 seasons now. It's just the time has finally come for everyone's waiting for it to happen. Scott let him go early, and now that Eric Tolson's going to be working to get this contract done, and hopefully with visa stuff going on between him getting out of Russia, coming over to the States, getting him at practice, getting him ready to go. Because if the Hurricanes at least get him in for the Ottawa game, then they are allowed to use him in the playoffs. So that's where Rod is really hoping this works out, because you're talking about adding Alexander Nikishin as a healthy scratch 7th defenseman at the least. And he's probably going to want to use him in a playoff game at some point too, in case someone's hurt or, maybe, as a, hey, with someone struggling, he can throw him in there if really need be. So to add a blue chip guy like Nikishin right now, especially with the fact that the Hurricanes are looking at we're nowhere facing the New Jersey Devils. Round 1, you got home ice, which we'll talk about in segment 2, but adding someone of Nikishin's caliber at this time is a very big step for the Hurricanes, because it's something that they really, can really benefit from. And just the fact that you're getting a guy who's gotten multiple over 150 points in the KHL over the last 3 seasons, captain of Scott's, Scott Petersburg, and it's just what he can do on the blue line. He can throw hits. He's got some really good hands. He can deke. He can shoot. He can play power play, penalty kill, averaging well over 22, 24 minutes a night, and just be that guy to have multi-point nights and be a guy that can do it, that can take over. And the fact you could add him to your left side if you want to put him behind Jacob Slavin. So you could look at Alexander Nikishin as a second defensive pairing left defenseman. That's insane to think about, the fact that you got a guy who can come in and do that. Or if they want to throw Gostisbehere up in the 2, Nikishin is your 3, that's fine as well. Or if you really need some versatility, you're looking at a guy who could be on your right side, which is his offhand, but he's done it before. And then you can add him wherever you need to on that side of things. If Rod really wants to, they can have Nikishin with Slavin. You got one of the best defensive defensemen in the AHL with one of the best all-around 2-way offensive heavy-minded Nikishin on your right-hand side. That would be a lethal top unit if they really want to go that way. But you're going to get a glimpse of Nikishin, hopefully with the Canes defense at the end of this regular season, hopefully, and possibly the playoffs, to see what we could be looking at for the 25-26 season, where you've got Slavin, Chatfield, Gostisbehere, Walker, Morrow, and Nikishin. You're looking at a potential what our top 6 defensemen in the Carolina Hurricanes would look like if you get Nikishin over now with all the guys that they already have there, because Morrow is already with the Canes. So you're looking at what a possible 6 would look like already. So very huge news. It's amazing to see that it's finally working out with the Hurricanes are getting Nikishin. Now it's just down to when's the contract going to be official and when's the visa going to be taken care of so that way they can get him over here, because you're talking 6 days away from the last regular season game for the Carolina Hurricanes. So it's definitely crunch time for them to get that deal done, get the visa done, and get Nikishin over before the end of the regular season. But this will definitely be a fun thing to watch, and hopefully we get some news very, very soon with him coming over to Carolina. Now, speaking of the Carolina Hurricanes in the playoffs, they did secure their first round of home ice advantage last night in overtime, forcing the game into overtime against the Washington Capitals. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NBA playoffs are almost here, even more so the NHL playoffs, and FanDuel is giving customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. And like I said, at the end of segment 1, the Carolina Hurricanes did secure home ice advantage in the first round of the 2025 NHL playoffs, because going into the game, Carolina only needed to secure home ice. If they got at least a point against Washington, the win would have been a lot better, because the fact the Hurricanes were up 2-0. But thankfully, the Seth Jarvis being absolutely inevitable, scored his 31st of the season after an incredible play where he knocks down the puck on an Alexander Ovechkin empty net attempt, goes to the other end, does a one-touch pass from Aho, beats Lindgren, and the Hurricanes tie it, forcing overtime. Unfortunately, they do lose in a shootout, but hey, they secured the point. That's all that matters. And now the Hurricanes clinch home ice in round 1 against the Devils. Now, there's still some work to do if they want to get the second seed in the East, but of course, there's 4 games left in the regular season. They got a back-to-back at home this weekend on Saturday and Sunday against the Rangers and the Maple Leafs, but that game was absolutely bonkers for the fact that you got Tom Wilson knocking Jackson Blake in their own netminder, scoring a goal, making it 2-0, and then the Hurricanes give up 4 goals. Then the Hurricanes are down 2, and then they come back to tie it 4-4 to force overtime. And of course, shootouts are shootouts. It is what it is. But hey, at least the Capitals didn't beat them in overtime. They had to beat them in a skills competition. But it goes to show that even when down, even have a crazy game like that where you lost the 3 previous, you were up this one, lost the lead, had to come back and claw your way, but still forced overtime. It really shows that there was really no quit in the Canes. It was just, it was one of those weird things where it's just a bad second period kind of puts you down, but they didn't roll over and quit, which is good to see. And they got the point that they definitely needed, and now Carolina gets to host the Devils in round 1 of the playoffs. Of course, overall for this game, regular season series is tied between the two sides. Unfortunately for the Canes, penalty kill unit not the greatest for them. They went 33%, given the Capitals 2 of the 3. Carolina only had 1 power play. And what can you do? But it's one of those things where you kind of wish that that second period didn't really happen, to where you see them scoring 3 goals. But hey, you know what? At least you got the 13th of the season from Stankoven. Jackson Blake gets his 16th on a weird play with Tom Wilson, and then later on you got Jordan Marnick for his 14th, and then Seth Jarvis's 31st with under 2 minutes left to tie the game and force overtime. And of course, the whole thing ends in a shootout with only 1 goal out of the entire group, and of course, it was Pierre-Luc Dubois. But overall, though, they did the job. You want them to go in there, secure the point, get home ice advantage. Just like how they clinched their playoff spot against Washington, they also clinched home ice against Washington. So I guess funny things happen when the Hurricanes play them, but it's one of those things where at least it was a lot better game overall outside of the second period where they gave up 3 goals, and that was in the middle of a 4 unanswered run. But it's one of those things where certain guys are out of the lineup, or, guys are getting rotated in. It's just, I can't really be too mad about it. I mean, obviously, you wish that game was finished a little bit different, but at least they didn't roll over and quit. At least they didn't let this game go away where they lost in regulation, and they still couldn't take care of home ice. But nonetheless, they did. They found a way to do what they needed to do, and they got the point. And now you're going to be hosting the Devils in round one, and you still got some work to do to get the second seed in the East. But all that matters is the fact that they got the job done. Now, like I said, would the penalty kill have been a lot better if they, didn't go 1 for 3? Yeah, but it is what it is. And, they only had one power play opportunity because, sure, that makes sense. We play the Washington Capitals and you only get one power play, but somehow they get 3. But I digress from that. It is what it is. Overall, they got the job done. You got the first round home ice. That's all that really matters. And now you kind of just, you look towards Saturday against the Rangers. You got Sunday against the Maple Leafs, and then you got the 16th against Montreal and the 17th against the Ottawa Senators. And before you know it, first round of the playoffs are here, and you're kind of looking at where, you're going for your 7th straight first round win. You got to play the Devils once again, and the last time these two teams faced each other was in the 23 playoffs in round 2. So you get to face the Devils a little bit earlier than usual. Then of course we all know what's waiting for them in the second round, depending on how that works out. But I mean, even with the addition of Nikishin, which I don't know how that's going to play out in the playoffs if the Hurricanes get him in time to use him. You guys gotta look at these next 4 games as something to be like, okay, taking off a little bit the last 4. You've gotten 1 point out of a possible 8 in the last 4 games. Sadly, no 500 record on the road because they're now 16, 19, and 2. Now it's just trying to win the last 2 road games. But honestly, it's just, you got at least win you got to win 2 of the next 4 games just to not end April in a losing skid, because you've already lost 3 in a row in regulation. You got the shootout loss, so you're 0-3-1 in your last 4. If you take at least 2 or 3 in the next 4 games, at least it's somewhat manageable. If they win 3 of the next 4, then that's great. Then you're looking at a possible 3-4-1 record to end the month of April, or 3-3-2 if you want to finish 500. But at least get some respectable finish to the end of April and the end of the regular season if we're going into the playoffs. But like I said, the good thing is at least you got the home ice secured. You got the point that you needed. Now it's just, you want to try to fight for that second seed in the East. And of course, everyone knows we're still in the fight with Toronto, Tampa, and Florida for that, massive boost to get a home ice, not just for round 1, but for pretty much the rest of the playoffs, depending on how Washington does in their first round. And if the Hurricanes get to the Eastern Conference Final, it'd be great to have home ice for that, depending on who they, at least if they're ahead of everyone else, at least, you got home ice in the Eastern Conference Final. So it should definitely be interesting to see how it plays out for the last 4 games of the regular season. But hey, you know what? Like I said, the goal was to get home ice round 1. They did it. It's secured. We know they're going to be playing the Devils. It should be a very interesting playoff series between these two sides, as, the Devils are kind of, getting a little bit hot as of late, even though they have a lot of injuries and guys they got to figure out what's going on with them. The Hurricanes kind of struggling a little bit. Also have some injuries to guys they really don't want right now, especially with just being Jesperi Kotkaniemi, but they're definitely ready to have him back in the lineup for sure. Kind of on a little bit of a skid, but hopefully with 4 games left, they can kind of figure it out and at least take at least 2 of the next 4. Hopefully you go 3 or 4, that'd be great. If they went 4 for 4, that'd be even fantastic. But if they go at least 500 over the next 4 games, at least gives you a good indication of, okay, end of April was a little bit of a struggle, but hey, now they're ready to go and take care of business with the playoffs just around the corner. Now, that being said, the Hurricanes, like I said, did lose in a shootout against the Washington Capitals, but they did get home ice advantage. And what did Rod Brind'Amour think of it all? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second. on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute MLB showdown or soaking in the excitement of an NBA matchup or the NHL Playoffs that are coming up very, very soon. But finding a great seat at a great price, that used to be a challenge until everyone's found Gametime. Gametime makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the events get closer, and with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front, no surprises at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So the Hurricanes, lost in a shootout, but they secured first round of the home ice against the New Jersey Devils. What did Rod Brind'Amour say to media after the game? Well, without further ado, let's jump into that right now with Rod.
That game after blowing the lead coming back in time.
They had a good second. We had a good first and third. We had to kill some penalties and did a great job in overtime. Killing that. So. I didn't love the second period, but the rest of the game, I thought we were on it.
I was going to say, what happened in that? You think it happened in that second period?
Well, they got playing, and then it's a good team. We're not going to dominate the game. It's not happening. So we they took it to us that period and got to tip their hat. But I give credit to my guys because we came back and dug in and gave ourselves a chance.
What does that third period show about being able to string those goals together and not give up in a game like that?
Well, it's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have ups and downs. And, I thought the first period we deserved way more. Like, we only up one. That's tough. They get that late one. And, for them, it's kind of like, I know they didn't like that period, and we should have had more. And that was the part that, if you look back on the game, that's probably when we needed to get more out of. But like I said, I'm happy with the way we came back.
Showed a lot of resiliency after that second period.
Yeah, because it was, like I said, it wasn't a good period for us. But this team always finds a way to dig in. Like I can count on my hands the amount of games where we just played terrible, just the whole game. It's not doesn't happen. So move on.
Big thank you to Rod Brind'Amour and the Carolina Hurricanes as always. You pretty much heard it from Rod. The Hurricanes did a great first period, had a great third period, had to kill some penalties, got the job done when they needed to in overtime. Unfortunately, lost in a shootout, but it is what it is. And Rod said it best, hey, they're a good team. It's not a team we're going to dominate. It's not a game we're going to dominate. It's just, unfortunately, the second period kind of did him in, and that's all it really is. But at least outside of a game like this where you had a 2-goal lead, you let them score 4. You had to come back to force overtime. You go to a shootout. It's still good to hear that Rod was like, hey, you know what? It is what it is. Couldn't dominate them. They're a really good team, but, there was some resilience in the Hurricanes and, got back to their game, forced overtime, and did the big things that was necessary to force it to a shootout. So it's, you got to look at the silver lining sometimes. It's one of those tough games where, you would love to won that game in regulation or just win it in general. Didn't really work out, but hey, what can you really do? And now it sets up like I said, the Hurricanes got, at least a point. It sets them up for home ice, and now they just move forward with that. It's, you got to take the wins and losses in certain areas, and luckily it worked out for them where they got the point. It wasn't ideal, wasn't a great way to go about that game where you are up 2, get scored on multiple times, and then it is what it is. But overall, really can't be upset about it. It's a lot better effort than, the last 3 games where you lose to Detroit, Boston, and Buffalo. You forced Washington into overtime, got to a shootout. Unfortunately, no one scored in the shootout for the Hurricanes. Capitals only needed 1, but in the end, hey, did the job. Secured home ice. That's all that really matters. So it's good to hear from Rod, talk about, didn't really like the second, but however, first and third were a lot better. Got overtime was all right. The PK did what they needed to do in the overtime period, and At least they got the job done of what they needed to, secure more advantages in the playoffs, and that's all you can really do. So, now we move on from there. The Hurricanes aren't having practice or media availability on Friday as they get ready for their back-to-back against the Rangers and Maple Leafs, which you can't really complain to the Hurricanes about that when you're talking about 3 games in 4 days, and then you have another couple off, and then it's another back-to-back in Canada to finish up the regular season. Yeah, you can take as many practice days as you want, but you definitely need some rest days as well, because that's a lot of hockey at the very end of the regular season when it goes into April. But it should be an interesting last 4 games you're talking about. Like I said, you got a back-to-back. You got your division rival in the Rangers. You're going up against the Maple Leafs. You're trying to fight for the second seed in the East. And then you go up to Montreal, where you didn't really play great the last time you were up there. So hopefully you get some advantages back against another team who's in a wild card spot, and you're playing another playoff team in the Ottawa Senators. So, like I said, these last 5 games, including Washington, you're playing 4 playoff teams. This will be a good test of where you're at going into the next phase of the season, where you're taking on 4 teams that are pretty much in the playoffs right now. This is a good test. We're seeing where you're at, because I'll talk about it. The power play's got to be rolling. You got to win on the road, and you got to be going into the playoffs with a hot run instead of kind of just sputtering in there and kind of struggling. So this is where, if you're Carolina, it's definitely a gut check time of, you've been sputtering as of late, but are you able to turn around at the right time to get yourselves ready for the playoffs? So this will be a big, interesting part of what we're looking at for the Carolina Hurricanes as they go into the next few games and into the next phase of the season, with the playoffs just around the corner. Definitely excited for that. It's going to be electric as always, because playoff hockey in Carolina is always next level. So it should be interesting, should be fun. It should, definitely, be great to see once again for the 7th time in a row of seeing some playoff hockey in Carolina. And the fact that, they got the job done Thursday night, got the point, and now even with the bigger news on a Friday morning that Alexander Nikishin has been allowed to leave SCA. Like I said, his rights still are with them for the KHL, but now he's allowed to sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. Most likely it's going to be a 2-year entry-level contract just because of his age, which is fine. We know Carolina's going to extend it by the time that thing is over. Now for that, it's just waiting on when's the news official, how's the visa stuff going to look, and then we just go on from there as the Carolina Hurricanes get ready for the playoffs and hopefully get that new addition of Nikishin at the right time. And we'll definitely see how that goes. But if you're a Carolina Hurricanes fan, you got to be really excited for the fact of, everything's gone on Thursday night and even on Friday morning. So now it's just the waiting game, and we get ready for some home action for the Hurricanes this weekend. But guys, that will be Friday edition. Thank you for listening today. For your second one, well, check out the Locked On game every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL's Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin, where I have link trees in both my bios where you can check out all of my Carolina Hurricanes articles at thehockeywriters.com. Also doing some, like I said, if you want to check out my baseball coverage, is at coverthecorner.com at SB Nation, talking about the Cleveland Guardians. If you want to check out my other podcast, well, it's the Surge Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Now, if you want to check out Locked On Hurricanes, well, it's Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio. Follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, well, Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Make sure to share with all your Canucks so they become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Friday, enjoy your weekend. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.